In the early stages of Batman's war on crime, there was one thing that the criminal underworld feared other than the Dark Knight himself: a cackling, hyperactive child dressed in green pixie boots and a domino mask. Robin's debut in Gotham and in comics was game-changing, shaking up the status quo in an effort to give the younger readers an audience surrogate, someone who they could be, if not the Batman. I mean, he's an adult and Robin is a child. Who do you think the kids will relate to more, barring the fact that many of us were not thinking about the $1 million mansion and the $1 billion company? But ever since his introduction only a year after the Batman's creation, Robin has solidified himself as a staple of the franchise, with the dynamic duo going on to influence pop culture for decades to come. But I do have to acknowledge that even in the big 2026, there are still a few people who prefer Batman to work alone, as Robin saps the seriousness out of his stories or just isn't realistic. And to that I say to you, without Robin, Batman's character growth just wouldn't have happened. Like, it would have been stagnant as he stays emotionally stunted. Bruce becoming a father and raising a child was the first step into the light after being enveloped in so much darkness. And to be frank, this little demon imp was an actual menace. I'm telling you, he is able to— you don't understand how crazy and scary this guy is. Imagine seeing a child and he found a way to hang somebody non-lethally out in the open for everyone to see. There's levels to this, and as we'll see later on in this video, the mantle of Robin has lasted for more than 80 years, with the red, green, and yellow streak of crime-fighting justice growing older and passing the title to other individuals, creating a new family-oriented story where the Batman will never be alone, but he will always be tested through each and every new personality who puts on the mask. Obviously, there were some Robins who are better than others, but this list is not about who's objectively the best in terms of fulfilling the role of Robin, but who I think was the best character in that role, and what they did and are currently doing for DC's storytelling potential. From that perspective, there are no bad Robins, and I would argue that they're all great characters in their own right. We'll be looking at the 5 main Robins in the current continuity, and to reiterate, we will be ranking them based on character and not who Robined the hardest. We're leaving out other mantles like Nightwing, Red Hood, and the Sort because they are not relevant to this conversation. And before we get started, I would like to shut down the TMNTification of the Robins as delegating each of them to have a certain trait, like being the funny, angry, smart, or secretly a compassionate animal lover Robin, is such a narrow way of thinking considering every single one of them have displayed enough of either of these traits for it to apply to any of them. Maybe not the last one, but here's my top 5 favorite Robins, ranked. I know there's only 5, but let me know your top 5 down below, and if you agree or disagree with my picks after hearing them, put it in the comments. I would love to hear it, and I'm sure everyone else will too. Anyways, let's get to it. Hey everyone, post-production Natrix here, just stopping by to remind you that if you enjoy the content, to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. It is free, and it really helps the channel out a ton. We're on our way to 50k subs, we're almost there. Anyways, let's get back to the video. Coming in at number 5, and to no one's surprise, it is Stephanie Brown in her time as the Red Bird. This was quite interesting as she quite possibly had the mantle for as long as she was Robin in publication. If you don't know, comic issues for a storyline come out once a month on a specific day, and the length of her storyline as Robin was, well, a couple of months, making it the shortest time anyone has ever been an official Robin. But bonus points for being the first girl to take on the mantle, and yes, shout out Maps from Gotham Academy. If you know, you know. But what makes her time as Robin notable is that it was a purely emotional decision on her part that Batman just ended up accepting for some reason. One of the reasons for Stephanie and her taking on this mantle is that she thought that Tim was with another girl. I know, very messy, but for Bruce, he felt like this maybe could work, and nobody knows why. If I could give you a reason, it's probably because Tim, after getting him right, Batman felt like he could do no wrong, especially if he made strict rules that prevent her from disobeying him, like Jason. If she did that, she would be fired immediately, and her ability to follow instructions was put to the test through giving her extensive training to add on to her very bare-bones skill set she obtained as the spoiler, which somehow got her quite far. However, it's important to remember that the other reason is that she has this very intrinsic fear of being quite incompetent when compared to the rest of the family that is compounded with her shaky relationship with Tim, who previously was fired from the role after his father, Jack, found out about his superhero identity. Jack Drake didn't always have necessarily the best or most stable relationship with his son, but he always cared for the safety of Tim, a son who would randomly disappear in the middle of the night for no apparent reason, and now he knows why. It would definitely be irresponsible for him to let his son continue to risk his life with this newfound knowledge. So, he did what any father who didn't hate their children would do. He stopped him. This is where Steph steps in. Oh yeah, and she doesn't step in at a calm moment either. This is peak emotional decision making. Tim's out of the picture, she pulls up to surprise him, thinks he's cheating, and instead of talking it out, she basically says, "You know what, I'll just become Robin," which is insane, but it's also very entertaining. So she makes her own suit, breaks into the Batcave, and forces Batman's hand, who wasn't even very reluctant in the first place. She actually does okay at first, but the cracks show pretty quickly. There's even a moment where she ends up going against one of Tim's villains, which feels pretty ironic considering she's trying to replace him, and that situation alone shows she's not fully ready for that level yet. And then it happens. She disobeys Batman in the field, the one rule that he made crystal clear, and just like that, she's fired on the dot. But instead of letting it go, she tries to prove herself in the worst way possible, executing one of Batman's contingency plans without fully understanding it. And as you might expect, it turns into pandemonium. It actually turns into something called War Games, a horrible storyline, but this is where we see Gotham descend into absolute chaos. Citywide gang wars, Black Mask getting involved, Steph getting captured and tortured, everything that could go wrong does. And that's really why she's here. Not a bad character at all, but the shortest run, the most emotionally driven decisions, and one of the biggest misfires you've ever seen from a Robin. It's less of a full chapter, and more like a "this is why you don't rush into the role" moment. It is what it is. It might have led to her death, maybe not, hard to tell. But anyways, let's move on to our next spot. Coming in at number 4 is Jason Todd. Now, I love Jason's time as Robin because it works in complete opposition to Dick's Golden Boy era with the Robin title. Now, this is not to say that Dick didn't give Bruce trouble or some difficulties. I mean, he is a child at the end of the day, and it was Bruce's first time raising somebody, albeit with Alfred's help, but Jason being so hard to deal with is exactly what the mantle needed. I know there are a few people who hate what Jim Starlin did with Jason, but to be honest, those people are just trying so hard to hold on to their precious J-Bin. Yes, that's what people call Jason Robin, and it just doesn't work for me because he's just a clone of Richard and just far less interesting, especially compared to the fantastic character work done in post-Crisis. I'm not gonna lie though, before I got into comics, I really could not fathom Jason being a cool Robin. I mean, the general consensus for those who don't read his comics is that he sucked as Robin, but was peak as Red Hood. But after reading Starlin's run, this couldn't be more false. I'd even argue that he was better and more consistent as Robin than everything that came after. And that really clicked for me after one day randomly reading Batman the Cult after Jason rescues a weary and broken Bruce from the clutches of a religious zealot named Deacon Blackfire. Here, with Bruce at his most weakened state in a dirty Gotham sewer, and with dozens of enemy and men around him just completely surrounding them, you see Jason's true character. A lesser man would likely give up, but Jason stands his ground, tells Batman that at least they'll go out in style, and says, "Let's party," going crazy until eventually being overwhelmed. But Jason was exactly the hype man he needed to get that second wind and to curb stomp that entire lobby of criminals, the entire crew, in an adrenaline-based fury. What makes Jason very interesting to me in this role is that he kinda works as a way to explore Batman's rehabilitation methods, but this time on a person who'd become his ally in crime. preventing a boy from turning down a path that he should be intrinsically against, as it took both of their parents. Bruce even acknowledges that Jason doesn't have Dick's natural grace, so instead, he tries to redirect that anger into something productive, because if he doesn't, Jason probably ends up on the other side of the mission entirely. He will be an enemy that Bruce has to fight when he's older. And that tension shows up perfectly in one of my favorite issues, The Diplomat's Son. You've got this situation where justice just doesn't work the way it's supposed to. The system fails completely, and Jason is the one forced to sit in that reality. But by the end of it, there's this moment on the balcony where it's just left completely, or just ambiguous enough. Did he push him or not? And the fact that you can even ask that question about Robin tells you everything about the character work that was done in this era, and I just love that panel, that moment where he's swinging away and Bruce is looking over his shoulder. That final scene in that issue is ingrained in my brain. But then, of course, everything comes crashing down with his death at the hands of the Joker, and from that point on, Jason stops being a character, but more of a warning. He's a cautionary tale for what this life can do to a kid. You see it in Bruce completely breaking down. You see it in how the entire Bat family treats the Robin mantle afterwards. And you definitely see it with Tim, who basically has to prove he's not going to be the next Jason story every single time he puts on the suit. Jason just doesn't leave the story either when he dies. He lingers in conversations, in hallucinations, and the way everyone reacts when his name gets brought up. There's a weight there that never really goes away. He haunts the story, and that alone makes his run as Robin way more impactful than people give it credit for. Coming in at number 3, and this might surprise a lot of people, it is Tim Drake. Now, from a purely objective standpoint, he was and is the best Robin. All he wanted was to be a sidekick to Batman, nothing more and nothing less, to help him come out of his depressing, self-destructive slumber after the death of Jason by reminding him that Batman always needs a Robin. Without one, he's incomplete, and we do not want that. From an accolades perspective, he's also very commendable, wearing the first modernized Robin suit with pants and popularizing the bow staff as Robin's main weaponry, both of which gets borrowed and used by other Robins in adaptations. While he wanted to just be a sidekick though, the events of Nightfall and Azrael kicking him out of the cave after he became Batman leads to him becoming somewhat of his own hero, getting his own book, the first Robin solo, that literally goes on for 200 issues if you count the previous 3 miniseries that act kind of like a setup for the ongoing, and they are really good in their own right. I'd also be a fake fan if I didn't mention Tim creating the Young Justice team in the 90s along with Superboy and Impulse. Rereading this run made me feel 2 things in particular, other than feeling fuzzy inside, is the fact that this was literally the next generation of heroes. The layup was there, everything was moving smoothly, and we even saw the birth of another generation, with Damian and Ira West being right behind them. Grayson's generation moved on to being members of the Justice League, while Tim and the others graduated into being full-fledged members of the Teen Titans. Also, I really like how Tim was the pioneer of Robin having a mask underneath his mask. It's always really funny, and we always really enjoy it. Unfortunately, this perfect team was dashed the moment Barry Allen showed his stupid blonde hair in the pages of Flashpoint and ruined everyone's day, ours included. But at least we can reminisce on why we love Tim Drake so much, in particular, his origin story and downward progression. Tim didn't become a superhero because of some traumatic event that pushed him to. He did it out of the kindness of his heart, out of fulfilling a need, an altruistic goal to make Gotham better by making Batman better. He didn't have to do this, which is what made the tragedies in his life so much more painful. The moment he gets properly integrated into Bruce's world, his mom dies. He gets a superhero girlfriend thanks to being Robin, and then she supposedly dies. He gains many friends, super friends, within the superhero community, but his 2 best friends that he started Young Justice with, Connor and Bart, both die in completely separate incidents only a couple months apart. Bruce eventually adopts Tim and becomes his new father, and then he gets killed by Darkseid. This sends him down a spiral of psychosis where he doesn't even know if he's more of a Drake or a Wayne after Bruce adopted him. Who even is Tim Drake anymore? All of that was compounded by the fact that he was the one who now had to protect Gotham, dealing with a huge Batman-level threat right away with explosions, superpowered assassins, Red Hood, and even a new anarchy. He leveled up so hard, the police literally made a signal, a Robin signal with an R, in the sky. The problem with Tim is that if you're not willing to explore all of this, he becomes the default Robin, the normal guy, the Peter Parker of the group, the one who goes to school and has high school friends, high school crushes, and high school problems. You can just plop him in a story as Robin and he just works there. But with the other Robins, you can't just do that. The story is more likely going to be adjusted for their arrival in some way, because they have wider connections and very unique personality types that forces any writer to rethink what they're doing and how they do it, as all of them are larger than life. This is why so many writers don't do anything interesting with Tim anymore, because you don't really have to, and it will still somewhat feel like Tim Drake if you're competent. And that's kind of the bittersweet thing about him. He's the perfect Robin on paper, smart, disciplined, emotionally grounded compared to the chaos around him, but that same stability is what makes him easier to overlook when the stories aren't actively pushing him forward. He works as the backbone, the glue, the guy who makes Batman better, but that also means he can fade into the background if the narrative doesn't force him into the spotlight. So, he ends up in this strange middle ground where he's arguably the most complete version of Robin, but also the one most at risk of being treated like a template instead of a character. And that's what separates him from the others, because Dick, Jason, Damian, even Stephanie all demand attention the moment they enter a story. They all have main character syndrome. Tim just fits, and whether that's a strength or a limitation depends entirely on how much a writer is willing to push him past that role. But with that said, that's exactly what makes the next two interesting, because let's be honest, these guys are anything but default. The next two are very interchangeable to me depending on the day. Honestly, you could look at both of these guys as my number one, but for the sake of keeping my top 5 going, in the number 2 spot is Damian Wayne. I don't know if everyone will agree with me with this, but Damian is by far the most complex Robin. I know a lot of people like to hate on him because they're fans of Injustice and don't read, but the generational character arc this boy went through needs to be commended. He started off as a cold-blooded killer cutting off heads due to the influence of the League of Assassins and Ra's al Ghul, his grandfather's teachings. But by the end of his journey, right now, he flipped the script. He becomes a healer of others, following the path of his other grandfather, Thomas Wayne, through reading his journal entries. Now, he wants to be a crime fighter and a doctor. And this might be completely wrong, but from what I remember, his love of pets, which is a really cool trait, also comes from Thomas Wayne. It's why he's also adopted like 20 of them in his adventures, even a giant Bat-Goliath creature, love him, and an ancient dragon. In an alternate future, Damian goes on to heal Gotham slowly but surely, creating a future that doesn't even need Batman anymore. But speaking of Bruce, Damian and his father might have one of the best father-son relationships and dynamics in all of comics. At one point, there was a lot of animosity and the relationship was really messy, but enjoyable to watch. You couldn't take your eyes off of it, but Bruce would not give up on his son. He knows how ingrained killing is to him and how the physical and mental trauma he experienced training as an infant, all the way up till when Talia dropped him off at his doorstep, was absurd. He's gone through way more pain than Bruce could ever think of at that age. His egotistical, don't-care personality was effectively ingrained in him like a tumor that would continue spreading if Bruce didn't do something about it. Fortunately, he raised a son that would be able to help him with this task during his absence, aka Darkseid killing him. But what makes Damian stand out is how his relationship evolves depending on who he's around. With Dick Grayson stepping into that mentor role early on, you get this really interesting clash where Dick has to basically be the older brother Batman instead of just treating him like another Robin successor. Damian eventually starts to respect him after having a lot of contempt for him, saying that you are not the blood son. Why should I listen to you? I was literally born and bred to be a warrior, to be a combat master. You're just a circus boy. But what I love about this relationship is that eventually it becomes as tough as Diamond. They become inseparable, and the great thing about it is that when they look back on those days when they were the dynamic duo, now when he's like Nightwing again, and he of course is still Robin, they still see themselves as the greatest of partners. But at the time, it forced Grayson to grow into a more patient leader than just a polished hero. It's one of those dynamics where both of these characters come out better for it. And if you haven't, please read Batgirl, I think volume 3, where Stephanie Brown is the main Batgirl. The dynamic these two have is some of the most fun I've ever had reading comics. The older sister, younger brother dynamic where they're at each other's throat all the time. But Stephanie is trying to get him to loosen up, but Damian is still in his weird way of speaking. Even when he's jumping on the bouncy castle, like it's very formal but very aggressive. He's like, I'll kill you, but I'm kind of having fun. It's very funny. Thematically, at least in the New 52 onwards, Robin, that R logo, starts to stand for redemption as he goes on his year-long journey to absolve all of his sins, every single thing that he did in the Year of Blood and his training in the League of Assassins. He's actively trying to undo what he was built to be, someone raised for violence, and replace it with something closer to meaning, purpose, and control. That shift becomes even more personal after Alfred's death, which hits him way harder than he ever expected, and it really pushed him into becoming a more introspective person, where he starts questioning what kind of legacy he actually wants to leave behind. What example does he want to set? Will he be able to have kids in this cycle of violence? Does he want that for his kids? He's thinking about all these things at 14 years old. Should he resurrect Alfred with the Lazarus resin? Is that something he even wants? Will this make the family come back together again? Is my mother and father always going to be at war with each other, even if right now they're in a good place? It's very, very interesting. But even with all of that growth, he never fully loses that edge. The arrogance, the I'm better than you because I was designed to be attitude, it still leaks through. The fact that I am the heir of the demon and I am the Batman's son, all of that comes in, and that's what keeps him fun. He's not a clean redemption story, he's a constant push and pull between who he was engineered to be and who he's choosing to become. And that tension is exactly why he works so well in modern stories. That same push and pull gets even more interesting when you look at his dynamic with John Kent and the Teen Titans, because with these guys, he isn't just a problem child Robin, he's suddenly the experienced one despite being only 13 years of age at that point in time. It forces him into a strange leadership role where he has to translate all of his intensity into guidance instead of power. And for somebody who grew up under constant control of himself, watching him slowly learn how to be a partner instead of a superior adds a lot of depth to his growth as Robin. It's one of the few relationships where he's genuinely allowed to just be a kid, even if he hates to admit it. Underneath all of it, there's still Bruce in the background shaping him, even when he's not directly involved. Damian's version of Robin is constantly trying to reconcile what Bruce represents: restraint, discipline, compassion, with what he was raised to be. So every mission becomes less about stopping crime and more about proving he can follow Bruce's path without losing the parts of himself that make him effective. That tension is what keeps his Robin era from ever feeling static, because even at his most heroic, you can still see the shadow of what he was originally built for creeping in at the edges, whether that's from his own personality to people from his past showing up in his present. And finally, coming in at the number 1, the OG himself, Dick Grayson. Who else could it be? But all jokes aside, what makes this duo so special is that for Bruce, it was literally a deja vu scenario. Imagine having an out-of-body experience, okay, and observing your life from the outside. For Bruce, looking at Grayson, it was like looking into a mirror. Both their parents died tragically in front of them at a young age, but instead of being frozen by that repeated trauma, Bruce saw an opportunity to save a kid who went through the same thing he did, inadvertently saving himself in the process. When he became Robin, the energy Grayson brought to the books was infectious. His daredevil personality and natural showmanship showed up everywhere. He was a performer, and as he got older, he even reflected on how much of an actor he really was, understanding that a lot of his childhood was a mask. He joked, laughed, and flipped his way through dangerous situations, pretending like nothing affected him, when in reality, he was a bundle of emotions. He was angry at the world, afraid of losing Bruce or not being good enough for him, and quietly carried that deep sadness for his parents, especially on the days that mattered most, like their anniversary or his birthday. From the outside, it looks like Dick didn't take anything seriously, but when pushed, he made it abundantly clear. He understands exactly how unfair the world is. That's why Batman and Robin exist in the first place, and despite how it looks, his head is always in the game. What makes Dick's role as Robin even more important is that he didn't just learn for Bruce, he taught him too. Through Dick, Bruce slowly learned that being a symbol didn't have to mean being distant or feared. It could mean being seen. That shift is even reflected visually when Batman transitions from the darker tones to the blue, representing a more open and hopeful presence, and that change does not happen without Dick. Robin didn't just make Batman better in the field, he also made him a better person. What really cements Grayson as the greatest Robin is how much of the DC universe he's actually lived through, from mobsters and grounded crime stories to his original rogues to the wild psychedelic chaos of the Silver Age. Dick was there for all of it. And more importantly, we actually see him grow through it. Whether it's in the original comics or modern retellings, we watch him evolve from a 10-year-old kid into a 17-year-old young man, finding his place in the world, going to college, and stepping out of the Batman's shadow. People also forget that Grayson isn't just Batman's partner, he's part of the bigger picture. He stands alongside the world's finest, not just as a sidekick, but as an equal presence in that legacy. Of course, that means with Batman and Superman, the world's finest includes Dick. He's always been there. Look at the old comics or even the new Wade and Morris series in 2022 that I also really recommend. Beyond that, he helped build something of his own with the Teen Titans. Starting with the Fab Five, you get some of the most grounded and relatable dynamics in comics. Characters that genuinely feel like people you've met before. And then with the new Teen Titans era, that evolution turns into one of DC's biggest successes, carrying the brand during a time when Marvel was dominating the industry. At the end of the day, Dick Grayson isn't just the first Robin, he's the blueprint, not just for Robins as a whole, but for sidekicks and for everything in between. He's proof that Robin isn't just that sidekick role, it's a foundation for the universe, a training ground for something greater, and in Dick's case, he didn't just create a hero, he helped redefine what a hero could even be, even at that young age. I doubt he understood or realized the legacy he would create, the mantle that would be passed down to others, to kids just like him who experienced trauma and tragedy and then were able to become something greater. But yeah guys, let me know down below, how would you rank the 5 Robins? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is my list similar to yours or is it not? Let me know down below in the comments. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you know when a new video goes live. And yeah, see you all later. Take care. Deuces. Peace.